Welcome to the second episode of Golf for Beginners. Today we are talking everything chipping. I think that chipping is really fun to learn. It's pretty simple once you know the good foundations of it. The first thing to know about chipping is the club selection. So in my hand, I have a 54 degree and a 58 degree. Now there will be different variation of club selection in everybody's bag. Now let's go over what loft means. It's not very complicated once you know the terminology. Loft is describing degrees from which, if you set the club down on the ground, how tilted the club face is. So a higher loft means that the club face is just more open, and a lower loft means that the club face is just more closed. So as you can see here on these two clubs, this is a lower lofted club in my left hand, and this is a higher lofted club. And you can see the higher lofted club here is just facing the sky a little bit higher. But the reason why we have lofts is so that we can hit the ball either higher or lower, and this comes in handy once you start getting into what kind of shot you want to hit and what's appropriate for the shot that you have in front of you. And chipping is so fun because every shot is really so different, and there are general rules, but you'll decide for yourself which clubs you like to use, which clubs you're not as fond of. So it's really just like a learning process of what you feel comfortable with. Every golfer will tell you they have their favorite wedge. Personally, mine is my 54. So if I have to hit a basic chip, I'm using my 54 degree, which is what we're gonna start with today. We're going to start with covering the grip. So if you recall in the last putting video, instead of interlacing our fingers like this, when we're putting, we just set them on top of each other. When we are chipping though, we do go ahead and interlace those fingers behind the grip. And this will be true for everything from when you're hitting a small chip like this to driver. You're gonna have exactly the same grip. Nothing is going to change there. Let's get into what it looks like setting up to a basic chip shot. Of course, there are a lot of things that can vary, like your lie, which really means where the ball landed. To start, we're just gonna hit a very basic chip. Setting up to it, I'm gonna start with my feet together. This really helps me start by aligning my body. Over a chip, you wanna keep your stance very short. So I see a lot of beginner golfers making the mistake of chipping with a stance that's just a little bit too wide, and this just makes things very complicated on yourself. By keeping a narrower stance, what that allows us to do is just focus on moving our upper body because our lower body is going to stay pretty still. You're gonna start with your feet pointed towards the golf ball, small stance, and then you're just gonna slightly open your feet so that they're pointed just left of the target. Now here, this allows your hips to be open, and that means they're not gonna have to move at all during the swing. And then I want 80 to 90% of the weight to be on my left foot. So you're gonna see it's gonna be very subtle, and you're not really gonna be able to see the weight shift, but you want most of the weight on your front foot. One really good way to practice this is to actually chip with one foot up, with your back foot up, and this will allow you to get the feeling of what it feels like to swing around your front foot. So just to kind of recap all of that, you want to have a very narrow stance. You're going to open it slightly, and then you're going to shift all the weight onto your left foot. Watch how little my lower body moves here going through the ball. Once I set up, my lower body really isn't moving at all. You can see my right knee slightly move as it follows my arms through the golf ball, but other than that, I'm keeping my weight on my left side, and I cannot emphasize this enough. So I will show you what happens if we get our weight back. I'm sure if you're a beginner golfer, you can understand the frustration of hitting a chip fat, which just means hitting the club a little bit too far behind the ball. If I have my weight back on my right foot and I'm chipping, the first thing I'm gonna hit is the ground. And once you hit the ground first, it's pretty much over from there. It's really hard to get consistent contact. And that's a really large part of why we just wanna make it easy on ourselves. So when I keep the weight on my left side, the probability of me hitting the golf ball first, it's so much higher, and it just makes life easier. So let me show you one more like this. Watch my lower body here. It's pretty stable. It's really not moving. The arms are doing all of the work here. Okay, I just switched up practice spots because the wind was getting a little crazy over there. Hopefully it's better over here. Now that we've covered our stance and our setup, One thing I do want to note about the setup is we aren't going to be as bent over as we would with an iron or a driver. When we're chipping, we're standing pretty straight up. So we have our open stance, and I'm not bending over any more than this. So as opposed to me being over a 7-iron, I'm pretty straight up. I would say I have just a slight bent in my knees. I have a narrow stance, I'm standing pretty straight up, and then I want to make sure I keep a very light grip here, and having a light grip is going to help you have a better feel. Just like putting, chipping is a lot about feel, and that's the reason why we also don't use a golf club while we are chipping. So just remember to keep your grip nice and light. A couple key points to remember: keeping an open stance, nice and narrow, standing up pretty straight, just a slight bend in the knees, and then a nice light grip. One mistake I see a lot of beginners make is having their hands too low when they're chipping. This will cause you to stand a little bit too far from the golf ball. So as you see, if I push my hands lower, I have to take a step back to hit it. And this just looks a lot more awkward, and I have a lot less control of the club face. So watch this shot here versus me being here. It's very different. And with chipping, we try to make things as simple as possible. Having my hands feel a little bit more upright than your typical golf shot is going to help us get nice and close to the golf ball and be able to keep the loft of the club how it's supposed to be on the ground. If I'm moving my hands up or down, it's actually changing the loft of the golf club. So we want to maintain the loft that the club is meant to have, and that's what's really going to teach you to be able to hit certain clubs consistent distances. And this is going to be your basic chipping setup. I want to reiterate that my lower body is going to stay super still, and this isn't necessarily an easy thing to do. You're gonna have to practice it a lot. Your lower body is probably going to want to move back and forth, but remember, the reason why we have an open stance is so we can keep our lower body nice and still. So here, I'm really only thinking about moving my shoulders back and then through. And I'm not getting super crazy with my wrists. I'm not hinging the golf club too much up. I really want the golf club to feel like it's staying in front of my upper body, and my shoulders here are doing most of the work. If you really keep a nice light grip, all you have to think about is moving your shoulders back and through, and make sure that the club comes in front of you so that it's pointed at your belly button when you come through. I'm gonna show you guys my finish here. So see how the golf club is directly in front of my upper body here? That's exactly how you're going to want to finish. So let's hit a couple chips here. I'm just going to this white flag. One thing that is definitely worth noting is that when you are hitting a very basic chip, you want to try to keep the club face as square as you can coming through. So with this club, I can hit a super high chip by simply just opening the club face coming through, having a little bit wider of a stance, and then hinging my wrists a lot. That ball is gonna go much higher, but for a simple chip, all you wanna do is keep the club face square to how you have it during setup. So here, I don't want it to be too open because I'm essentially changing the loft of the club face halfway through the swing, which makes it really, really difficult on yourself. So when I'm chipping, I just wanna make sure that the club face slightly opens, and then it's gonna pretty much stay at that spot all the way through the shot. So you can see that just looks so much more harmonious, and I'm not trying to move the club face left or right. I'm not trying to close it. I just want it to stay where it started, and don't make it too complicated. Now that we've talked about the basic setup, let's talk a little bit about spin, because it is a part of chipping and using your wedges around the green. So spin is really your golf ball hitting the green, and then you'll notice that it kind of either spins back or spins forward. Spin can be really useful if we do not want the golf ball to roll out. So not on this shot particular, but there are some shots where you don't have as much green to work with and you have to land it and stop the ball. That's where spin comes in really handy. One easy way to create spin in a golf shot is opening the club face. You're gonna open your stance a little bit more exaggerated than previously, but you want the club face to be more open. So it's pointed towards the sky. And what I wanna do here is I'm not necessarily taking it back further, but I am going to hit it a little bit harder. That's gonna allow the club to come under the ball, and it's gonna create that spin that we want when we want the ball to hit the green and stop. So I'm gonna show you guys open stance here. Club face is more open. And remember, my target isn't over here, my target is right here. So that'll give you a good visual for how open my stance actually is to the target. And then all I wanna do here is thinking about keeping my weight on my left side, just like before, and then I'm gonna hit this ball a little bit harder. So it is gonna be a little bit bigger of a swing. Really, really important that when you are hitting a higher shot that is going to spin, you want to make sure that your grip is very light and that you just let the club move back and through, because the goal of this shot here is to get the club face to come underneath the ball. To show you guys this example, I'm going to grab my 58 degree now, which is more lofted. And this is a little bit more of an advanced shot because it is harder to hit the ball high and have it stop. But with my 58 degree, I'm going to create more spin, I'm going to slightly open the club face and then open my stance, and I'm just gonna take a little bit longer of a swing. So I am going to teach you guys one of the most useful shots in golf. This is such an underrated golf shot. I'm going to use an 8-iron to hit this chip. We're not very far away. The reason why I'm able to use this club here is because we do have a good amount of green to work with. Now, if I was, say, going to the pin that is a little bit further, we have so much green, this would be a really, really great club to use as well. So really any shot where you don't need to get the ball particularly high off the ground, it's really fun to practice and learn how to hit a chip shot with a lower iron like this. There is significantly less loft on this club. And really what this shot is going to help you with is your consistency. So with wedges, they're pretty easy to miss hit. With an 8-iron, it's a lot harder to miss hit the golf ball. This club is a little bit longer, so I am going to grip down slightly. Instead of my hands being in the middle of the grip, I'm going to have them lower on the grip, and I'm gonna take the exact same setup. And then this is going to be very, very similar to a putting stroke. We're really not gonna have any wrists involved, and we're just gonna take it back and forth. It will take a little bit of time for you to learn how hard to hit these shots, but they're gonna be so useful when you have a longer chip. So right now, I'm just going to that yellow pin over there, and all I want to do is have a nice consistent back and through. All right, so I hit that one a little bit too hard. That's part of learning it. But as you can see, the ball hit and it just ran. So you're gonna have a lot more consistency in your landing spot with shots like that. So now we know that ball went a little bit too far past the pin. It did break a little bit to the right. So I'm going to adjust my landing spot probably only this far off the green and let it roll the rest of the way there. Settle. All right, so, I mean, that shot was even a little bit better. We probably have about 5 feet in. Still not ideal, but as you can see, you really just have to play around with how hard you're going to hit it. And then if I don't like this 8-iron, I can grab a 9-iron and try to hit a very similar shot. But you can see there that the movement is so minimal that it's really, really hard to mess that shot up. At that point, it's really about how big of a backswing we take and how hard we're hitting the golf ball. So let's try one more and try to get it even closer here. I'm going to slightly adjust my landing spot. I do want to take this ball a little bit more left because it breaks significantly right. Let's see how close we can get it here. I think that's going to be pretty good if it stops. Settle a little bit. Yeah, I really can't complain with that. I have a 2-3 foot putt. That's really gonna be the easiest way as a beginner to lower your score, is by getting these shots down. Even golfers who are more advanced have a hard time around the green. So having shots like this in your back pocket are gonna be so useful. Now on this same chip, I could definitely use my 54° as well. And I'm just gonna show you how different that ball flight looks compared to the 8-iron. So obviously this ball is gonna go a little bit higher and it's not gonna roll out as much. So I'm going to adjust my landing spot, still going to account for the break. Definitely played enough break there. That's still a good shot. I just have a lot more room for error there because it's just a harder club to hit. So don't forget about your irons and don't be afraid to really practice with different clubs. I know when you're on the practice green, it's kind of hard to think about what shots you're gonna have on the golf course, but the way I want you to think about it is really think about giving yourself instances where you have just a little bit of landing space and instances where you have a lot of landing space, and then you'll get a good idea from there what club you want to use, how hard you want to hit it, and it's all about getting the practice in. I have spent hours just sitting on the chipping green hitting golf balls, and that's really what it takes to develop a feel for chipping. When you're a beginner, just make sure that nobody is directly in your line across from you, because it does happen. We do all blade it once in a while. You want to make sure that you don't hit anybody. But other than that, like, don't be afraid to hit bad shots and just make sure that you're not intruding in anyone else's space. Other than that, the chipping green is pretty much all of yours. We have covered setup, how to hit a variety of different chip shots, and that is pretty much it for this video. I've been really loving doing these series, working my way up through the bag. Next, we are going to do some pitching and some longer shots, so I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.